Rain hammered against the corrugated roof of Tobias Grant's farmhouse like bullets from heaven. He'd grown used to sound over 7 years, used to everything being loud except human voices. The farm on Kepler. For 42 be stretched for miles in every direction, a sea of golden wheat that fed colony ships he'd never see. Tobias poured himself another glass of homemade whiskey, watching the storm through the kitchen window. 34 years old, and he'd chosen exile. After the divorce, after the accusations, after watching Earth's court strip away everything he'd built, he'd signed a one-way contract to the outer colonies. This forgotten rock became his monastery. The crying started around midnight. At first, he thought it was the wind. Kepler's storms could sound almost human, but this was different. Desperate, broken. Tobias grabbed his plasma rifle from above the door and activated the porch lights. She collapsed the moment he opened the door. Silver-white formatted with blood and rain, delicate fox-like ears pressed flat against her skull, and a tail that curled protectively around her body. She wore nothing but torn fabric around her hips, her humanoid torso bare and covered in strange burn marks. But it was her face that stopped him, wide golden eyes filled with terror, elegant features that were simultaneously alien and achingly familiar. Christ, Tobias breathed, setting down the rifle. He lifted her easily. She weighed almost nothing, and carried her inside. Her eyes fluttered open as he laid her on his couch. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, pointed frantically at the sky through the window, and made a series of rapid clicking sounds he didn't understand. Her other hand pressed against his chest, right over his heart, and then to her own. "Please," those golden eyes seemed to say. "Hide me." Tobias nodded slowly. "You're safe here. I don't know what you're saying, but you're safe." She relaxed slightly, though her breathing remained shallow. He fetched his medical kit, designed for human injuries, but hopefully universal enough. As he cleaned the burns on her arms, she winced but didn't pull away. Her skin was softer than anything he'd touched in years, warm despite the cold rain. Outside, through the storm, he saw them. Lights in the sky. Not lightning. Ships. 3 of them. Sweeping search patterns across his fields with brilliant white beams. The foxwoman saw them too. She tried to stand to run, but her legs buckled. Tobias caught her, and she buried her face against his shoulder, trembling like a frightened animal. Her hands clutched his shirt, claws carefully retracted. "I've got you," he whispered, though she couldn't understand. "Whatever you're running from, they'll have to go through me first." The lights grew closer. Tobias killed the farmhouse lights and carried her down to the cellar, a reinforced bunker he'd built for tornado season. She clung to him, her breath warm against his neck, body pressed tight as he descended the stairs in darkness. The bunker was small, lined with supplies, and lit by a single emergency lamp. He set her on the cot and grabbed the medical scanner. The device hummed, projecting holographic readings he barely understood. Nothing critical, but the burns were definitely from energy weapons. She watched him with those luminous eyes as he worked, head tilted in curiosity. When he applied dermal regenerator to a particularly nasty burn on her shoulder, she caught his hand and brought it to her cheek, nuzzling against his palm. The gesture was so trusting, so intimate, that Tobias felt something crack inside his chest. 7 years of carefully maintained isolation crumbling. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She blinked, then touched her chest. "Kiva," she said, the word like wind chimes. "Kiva," he repeated. She smiled, actually smiled, and touched his chest questioningly. "Tobias." "Tobias." Her accent made it musical. She repeated it several times, seeming pleased with herself, then pointed upward. Her expression darkened. She made clawing gestures, pointed at the burns on her arms, then held up 5 fingers. 5 hunters. "Got it." Kiva stood unsteadily and moved to a dusty box in the corner, pulling out one of Tobias's old shirts. She held it up questioningly, and he nodded, watching her slip into it, the fabric hanging to her thighs, her tail emerging from beneath. He felt heat rise in his face. 7 years alone would make any man notice. She noticed him noticing. Her ears perked forward, and a soft purring sound emanated from her throat. She moved closer, head tilted, studying his face with an intensity that made his heart race. Above them, he heard it, the whine of engines directly overhead. Kiva's ears flattened. She pressed against him instinctively, and Tobias wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Through the ceiling, voices crackled in an alien language, harsh and commanding. Footsteps on his porch. The crash of his door being kicked in. They were searching his house. In the darkness of bunker, Kiva's hand found his, her fingers interlaced with his, claws barely touching his skin. She was shaking again, but when he squeezed her hand, she squeezed back. The footsteps moved overhead, heavy boots on wooden floors, furniture being overturned. They were thorough. Kiva buried her face against his chest, and Tobias held her close, breathing in her scent. Rain and something wild, like forest after rain on earth. Her arms wrapped around his waist, her body fitting against his as if designed for it. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the footsteps retreated. Engines whined. The ships moved on, continuing their search pattern across the valley. But Kiva didn't let go. And Tobias, surprising himself, didn't want her to. When she looked up at him in the dim light, there was something new in her golden eyes. Not just fear or gratitude. Recognition. As if she saw in him the same loneliness she carried. She rose on her toes and pressed her forehead to his. Some gesture of thanks from her world, he guessed. But when she pulled back slightly, their faces were inches apart, and the air between them felt electric. They stayed in the bunker through the night, listening to the ship's patrol above. Tobias gave Kiva water and protein bars, which she sniffed suspiciously before eating. She devoured 3, clearly starving, then curled up on the cot with her tail wrapped around herself. He tried to give her space, settling on the floor with his back against the wall. But after 20 minutes, she made a small sound, almost a whimper, and patted the cot beside her. "You sure?" he asked. She patted again more insistently. Tobias laid down beside her, staying carefully on his side of the narrow cot. Kiva had other ideas. She immediately pressed against him, her back to his chest, pulling his arm over her waist. Her tail draped across his leg. The purring started again, soft in content. He hadn't held anyone in 7 years. "Thank you," she whispered in her language, the meaning clear even without translation. They dozed fitfully. Every sound from above made them both tense, but the ships didn't return to his farm. By dawn, the rain had stopped, and pale purple light filtered through the cellar's small window. Kiva woke first. She turned in his arms to face him, studying his features in the morning light. Her fingers traced a scar on his jaw, a farming accident from year 3. She frowned, concerned, then kissed it softly. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Tobias forgot to breathe. She pulled back, searching his face for a reaction. When he didn't pull away, she grew bolder. Her hand moved to his chest, feeling his heartbeat, racing now. She tilted her head, ears forward in question. Tobias knew he should be cautious. She was alien on the run, traumatized. He was her only refuge. This would be wrong. But when she leaned in, her lips brushing his with feather-like curiosity, all his arguments dissolved. The kiss deepened slowly. She tasted like rain and something sweet he couldn't name. Her hands moved his hair, and that purring sound grew louder. Tobias pulled her closer, feeling the softness of her fur against his skin. The warmth of her body pressed along his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kiva smiled. A full, genuine smile that transformed her face. She said something in her language that sounded like wonder. "Yeah." Tobias agreed, not knowing what she'd said but feeling it anyway. They climbed back upstairs to survey the damage. His house was wrecked. Furniture overturned, cabinets ransacked, even his mattress slashed. But the farm itself seemed untouched. The wheat swayed golden in the morning breeze, indifferent to interstellar drama. Kiva walked to the porch, scanning the horizon nervously. Tobias stood behind her, and she leaned back against him naturally, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. He showed her the farm, teaching her words. Wheat, tractor, bawn. She repeated them carefully, then taught him her language. Neva for sky, Thran for home, Kes for She touched his hand, then hers, then interlaced them. Together, they worked in the fields that afternoon, Kiva adapting quickly to farm tasks despite never having done them. She was strong, graceful, and laughed when she got dirt on her nose. Tobias wiped it away, and she caught his hand, pressing it to her cheek again. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange, they stood at the edge of his property. Kiva pointed to a constellation rising in the east, then to herself. Home, so far away. Then she pointed at Tobias, at the farm, at the small house with its broken door. She made the gesture again, forehead to forehead, and whispered, Thren. Home. The ships returned on the third night. Tobias and Kiva were in his bed. He dragged a mattress down from the storage barn, tangled together after hours of exploring each other with hands and lips, and whispered words in 2 languages. Her head rested on his chest, ears twitching at every sound, tail wrapped around his leg possessively. The plasma cannons announced their arrival. His north field erupted in flames, a warning shot that lit the night sky orange. Kiva bolted upright, eyes wide with terror. Through the window, 5 ships descended in formation, their searchlights converging on his farmhouse. Get dressed, Tobias said, already pulling on pants. Now. But Kiva grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. She was crying, golden eyes shimmering. She pushed him toward the back door, shaking her head frantically. Run. Save yourself. Not a chance, Tobias said. He'd spent 7 years running from his past, from accusations that had destroyed him, from a world that had decided he was guilty without proof. He'd run to this forgotten planet and buried himself in isolation, convincing himself he was better off alone. Then she'd knocked on his door, bleeding and terrified, and in 3 days had shown him what 7 years alone had cost him. He wasn't running anymore. Tobias grabbed his rifle and an old projectile weapon from the safe. Illegal on Earth, perfect for backwater farming. Kiva's eyes went wide when she saw the guns. She grabbed his shirt, pleading in her language, but he kissed her hard enough to quiet her protests. I've got nothing left to lose, he said, but I'm not losing you. The ships landed in his yard, engines kicking up dust. Amplified voices boomed in that harsh alien language. Kiva translated haltingly. Give back property. She is experiment. She is ours. She's not property, Tobias shouted back. She's a person. Laughter from the ships. One of the hunters emerged, tall, armored, with the same fox-like features as Kiva, but twisted by cruelty. He spoke into a translator. Human knows nothing. Female is genetic construct. Made to serve. Made to obey. Return her or farm becomes ash. Kiva stepped forward, chin raised, and responded in their language. Tobias didn't need translation to understand her tone. Defiance. The hunter snarled something back. Kiva's response was a single word, sharp as a blade. Then she spat at his feet. The hunter raised his weapon. Tobias fired first. The projectile round punched through the hunter's shoulder joint, finding the gap in the armor. He went down screaming. The other 4 opened fire immediately, plasma bolt scorching the farmhouse. Cellar. Tobias yelled, returning fire. He dropped another hunter with a lucky shot before Kiva dragged him backward. They tumbled down the cellar stairs as his house exploded above them. In the darkness, choking on smoke, Kiva pressed something into his hand, a small device she'd hidden in her clothes. She activated it, and a holographic map appeared. Coordinates. A location on the far side of the continent. Thren, she said, touching the coordinates, then his heart. Together. Kes. A safe house. Other escapees. Freedom. We'll never make it, Tobias said. They'll hunt us the whole way. Kiva kissed him fiercely. When she pulled back, her golden eyes were blazing with determination. She'd spent however long as someone's experiment, someone's property. She'd escaped across the stars and survived alone until she found him. She wasn't going back. Together, she said in English, the word accented but clear. Fight. Above them, the hunters were tearing apart the ruins. They had maybe minutes before the cellar was discovered. Tobias checked his ammo and made a decision he should have made 7 years ago. Stop hiding. They fought their way out with cunning and desperation. Kiva knew how the hunters operated, their tactics, their weaknesses, their arrogance. She led Tobias through the smoke, communicating with touches and glances. When they emerged from the cellar, it was behind the ships, where the hunters weren't looking. Tobias hot-wired one of the smaller crafts while Kiva kept watch. The engines whined to life just as the hunters realized where they were. Plasma fire stitched across the ship's hull, but Tobias gunned the throttles, and they rocketed into the night sky. The chase lasted until dawn. 3 ships pursued them across Kepler's wilderness, over purple mountains, across silver deserts, through canyons that glowed with bioluminescent moss. Tobias had never flown anything in his life, but Kiva guided his hands on controls, her fingers covering his, showing him how to bank and dive. They lost 2 ships in a box canyon. The third followed them into an electrical storm that fried their instruments. When they finally crashed, a control descended into a meadow of alien flowers. Both ships were smoking wrecks, but they were alive, and the hunter's ship had come down harder. Tobias grabbed his rifle, ready for a final stand, but Kiva touched his arm. She walked to the hunter's crashed ship alone, head high. The pilot emerged, limping, weapon drawn. She spoke to him in their language for a long time. Tobias watched as her words seemed to crack something in the hunter's expression. Finally, the hunter lowered his weapon. He looked at Tobias, then at Kiva, and said something that sounded almost like regret. Then he limped back to his ship and took off, heading skyward. He didn't look back. "What did you tell him?" Tobias asked. Kiva's hand found his. "Truth, that humans know freedom, no choice, that I choose you." The safe house was real, a small settlement of escaped experiments and sympathetic aliens who'd built a hidden community in the wilderness. They welcomed Kiva like a hero and Tobias like he belonged. That first week, they just slept, held each other in a real bed, in a place where no one was hunting them, and remembered what peace felt like. One morning, Kiva took him to a hillside overlooking the settlement. The sun was rising, painting the sky in colors Earth had never known. She placed his hand on her stomach, and her purring started again, deeper, more resonant. Tobias's eyes widened. "Are you?" She nodded, golden eyes shining with joy and fear and hope. He kissed her there on that hillside under an alien sun, tasting salt from both their tears. 7 years ago, he'd lost everything. 3 months ago, a stranger had knocked on his door at midnight and changed his life forever. "Thren," Kiva whispered against his lips. "Home." "Yes." Tobias agreed, looking at her, his impossible salvation, his fierce foxwoman in his future. Home. Below them, the settlement was waking up. Smoke from cooking fires curled into the morning air. Children, some human, some alien, some beautiful mixtures of both, were already playing the fields. This community of refugees and outcasts had built something real here, something worth protecting. Tobias Grant had come to Kepler, 442b, to hide from humanity. He'd found something better, a reason to fight for it, and in the arms of a woman from the stars, he'd finally found the belonging that had eluded him on Earth. The farm was ash now, but that didn't matter. He'd been growing wheat for ships that never came, feeding a civilization that had abandoned him. Here, he'd grow something else. A family, a home, a future where his child, half human, half something wonderful, could run free under purple skies. Kiva pulled him close, her tail wrapping around them both. In the distance, more ships appeared on the horizon. Not hunters this time, but traders, refugees, others seeking the sanctuary this hidden settlement offered. Together, she said in English, the word she practiced for him. Always. Tobias promised in her language, the word she taught him first. On a forgotten planet at the edge of known space, a farmer who'd given up on happiness, and an alien woman who'd fought for freedom watched the sun rise on their new world. And in that moment, neither of them was alone anymore.